What happens to a god when it's forced into chains, stripped of its name, and buried beneath a foreign faith? Does it die or does it adapt, hiding in plain sight? The enslaved Africans who endured the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade didn't just fight for survival. They fought to keep their gods alive. As they were torn from their homeland, they carried their beliefs with them. But in a world that demanded conformity, they had to be creative, even secretive, to ensure that their deities survived. Rather than abandoning their gods, enslaved Africans found ingenious ways to preserve them, often veiling them under the guise of foreign figures. The Yoruba Orishas, deities tied to nature, destiny, and the elements, were disguised as Catholic saints. Ogun, the god of war and iron, became linked with Saint George. Oshun, the goddess of love and rivers, was hidden behind the image of the Virgin Mary. These transformations were not just survival tactics. They were acts of resistance, a way to maintain a thriving spiritual connection, despite the oppressive forces that sought to erase their identities. But the syncretism didn't stop there. In places like Haiti, Cuba, and Brazil, Vodin, a powerful African spiritual system, merged with Christianity in a profound way. Gods like Papa Legba and Erzuli, once rooted deeply in African cosmology, adapted, becoming intertwined with Catholic saints like Saint Peter and the Virgin of Regla. These gods didn't disappear. They evolved, reshaping themselves within the context of the world around them, all while maintaining their essence. This was not just about survival, it was about resistance, transformation, and the unyielding force of culture. Throughout this video, we will explore how African deities from Ogun to Yemaya found ways to endure in the face of unimaginable oppression. Rather than dying in the chains of slavery, they transformed, their names and faces veiled, but their power never diminished. These gods didn't fade into history, they adapted, and in doing so, they became symbols of resistance, resilience, and enduring spirit. So as we unfold this story, ask yourself, what does it mean for a god to hide, to survive through adaptation? And when the time comes, can these gods rise again, not just in spirit, but in the hearts of those who still believe in their power? The Yoruba people, originating from the region now known as Nigeria, have a spiritual connection that runs deep through the fabric of their culture. Their beliefs are centered around the worship of Orishas, powerful deities who govern the forces of nature, human emotions, and destiny itself. Each Orisha embodies specific attributes: Oshun, the goddess of love, beauty, and rivers; Ogun, the god of war, iron, and labor; Yemaya, the mother of the seas; and Shango, the god of thunder and lightning. For the Yoruba, these deities were not abstract concepts. They were powerful, tangible forces that directly shaped their lives. The connection between the people and their Orishas was sacred and all-encompassing, dictating how they lived, loved, and even died. When millions of Africans were forcibly brought to the Americas as part of the transatlantic slave trade, their spiritual beliefs were disrupted and crushed by the colonial powers that enslaved them. European slave traders demanded that the enslaved Africans abandon their traditional religions in favor of Christianity. Yet, rather than letting go of their gods, enslaved Africans found ways to adapt. The Yoruba Orishas, whose power had been so deeply rooted in their homeland, did not disappear. They were hidden in plain sight, cloaked in the guise of Catholic saints. This merging of two belief systems, known as syncretism, became one of the most creative and resilient acts of survival during slavery. The syncretism of the Yoruba Orishas with Catholic saints served as both a means of survival and a subtle form of resistance. Forced to worship the Christian God in public, enslaved Africans would secretly maintain their devotion to the Orishas, finding ways to equate the saints with their own deities. Oshun, the goddess of love and rivers, became associated with the Virgin Mary, a symbol of purity and motherhood. Both deities were seen as compassionate, life-giving figures, their connection forged in the crucible of oppression. In the same way, Ogun, the god of war and iron, found his likeness in Saint George, a warrior saint embodying strength and valor in the face of adversity. Yemaya, the mother of the seas, was aligned with the Virgin of Regla, revered as a maternal figure who protected the people. Shango, the god of thunder and lightning, took on the mantle of Saint Barbara, known for her association with fire and divine power. This syncretism wasn't just a survival mechanism, it was a bold act of cultural resistance. Enslaved Africans had little to no control over their daily lives, yet they found ways to continue their religious practices through the symbolism of Catholicism. It was an act of defiance against a system that sought to erase their identities and spirits. In the eyes of their captors, the enslaved were simply adopting the faith of their masters, but in reality, they were holding on to their spiritual practices, adapting them in a way that allowed them to endure. They found a way to make their gods fit within the confines of the religion they were forced to accept, thereby protecting their cultural identity and resisting the erasure of their heritage. The impact of this syncretism cannot be overstated. While it allowed enslaved Africans to maintain a connection to their Orishas, it also became a tool for organizing resistance. The worship of Ogun as Saint George, for example, was a symbol of rebellion, a connection to the strength and resilience of those who fought for freedom. Yemaya, associated with the Virgin of Regla, provided solace and maternal protection, a way to seek spiritual guidance in a world that offered nothing but brutality. These hidden practices became a way for the enslaved to claim some form of autonomy, to say, "Though we are in chains, our spirits are free." Over time, this syncretism took on new life in the Americas, particularly in places like Cuba, Brazil, and Haiti, where the Yoruba religion fused with other African spiritual systems and Catholicism to form new hybrid religions such as Santeria, Candomblé, and Vodou. These new religious practices not only preserved the Yoruba traditions, but also adapted them to the new realities of the Americas. They became central to the identity of African-descended peoples in the New World, serving as a spiritual anchor and a way to resist the oppressive systems of colonialism and slavery. The syncretism of the Yoruba Orishas with Catholic saints also left a profound legacy that continues to shape the spiritual landscape of the African diaspora. In Cuba, Brazil, and Haiti, the worship of these deities became a cornerstone of Afro-Caribbean religious practices, where the Orishas were not merely symbols of the past, but living forces that continue to influence the lives of millions. The practice of syncretism ensured that the Yoruba spiritual traditions were not only preserved, but also evolved, becoming a symbol of the strength, resilience, and cultural pride of the African diaspora. In reflecting on this history, we see that the syncretism of the Yoruba Orishas with Catholic saints was not merely a survival strategy, it was a triumph of the human spirit. It was a way for enslaved Africans to hold on to their gods, to keep their cultures alive, and to resist the forces that sought to destroy them. In this merging of faiths, the enslaved found a way to preserve their humanity, to ensure that their beliefs and their spirits endured through the darkest of times. The story of this syncretism is one of resistance, resilience, and the unbreakable will to survive. It is a testament to the power of culture, identity, and faith, a power that no chains could ever fully contain. Vodun, often known as voodoo in the Americas, is an African spiritual system deeply rooted in ancestral worship, reverence for nature, and the veneration of powerful deities. Originating from the Fan and Yu peoples of West Africa, Vodin centers around the belief that all things, both living and non-living, are interconnected through spiritual energy. It is a religion that honors the forces of nature, rivers, mountains, trees, as well as a vast pantheon of gods, spirits, and ancestors who play central roles in the lives of their followers. Vodin is not merely a system of belief, but a living, breathing practice, deeply tied to the cultural and spiritual fabric of African communities. Its deities, known as the Loa, are considered intermediaries between the human and the divine, offering guidance, protection, and healing. When millions of Africans were forcibly brought to the Americas as slaves, their spiritual systems were violently suppressed by European colonial powers. Christianity, the religion of the colonizers, was forced upon them, creating a stark divide between the faiths of the enslaved and their captors. However, enslaved Africans did not abandon their gods and spiritual practices. Instead, they found ways to adapt their ancestral beliefs within the constraints of Christianity. The fusion of Vodin with Catholicism in places like Haiti, Cuba, and Brazil became a crucial survival mechanism. The enslaved Africans cleverly merged their Vodin practices with the Catholic faith, disguising their deities as saints to avoid persecution. This syncretism allowed them to continue worshiping their gods while appearing to comply with the imposed religious order. Vodin, rather than fading away, transformed, becoming a hybrid system that would thrive under the weight of colonialism and slavery. Vodin's adaptation to Catholicism is most clearly seen in the way African deities were hidden behind the faces of Catholic saints. Papa Legba, the guardian of the crossroads and the gatekeeper between the human and spiritual realms, became associated with Saint Peter, who is often depicted with keys in Catholic iconography. Similarly, Erzuli, the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, was syncretized with the Virgin Mary, as both figures are revered as maternal, nurturing beings. Dambala, the serpent god of creation and wisdom, found his Catholic counterpart in St. Patrick, who is often depicted with snakes in Christian lore. These adaptations were more than mere substitutions. They were acts of spiritual resilience. The Loa maintained their presence in the lives of the enslaved, their rituals and offerings continuing in secret. By aligning their deities with Catholic saints, enslaved Africans ensured that their spiritual practices would survive, even in the face of systemic efforts to erase their identity. This religious syncretism became more than just a survival tactic. It was a form of resistance. Vodun, in its hidden Christian form, was not just a means of preserving African spiritual traditions, it also served as a powerful symbol of defiance against colonial and slave systems. In the Haitian Revolution, Vodun played a central role in inspiring and guiding the enslaved people towards freedom. The famous Bois Caiman ceremony, held in 1791, is believed to have been a Vodun ritual that sparked the revolution. The ceremony invoked the spirits of the ancestors, calling on the strength of the Loa to help the enslaved fight for their liberation. Vodun became a source of spiritual strength and unity, providing not only the hope and courage needed to fight, but also a sense of divine justice that would ultimately lead to the successful overthrow of colonial rule. In this way, Vodun was both a spiritual practice and a rallying cry for freedom, demonstrating that religion could be a tool for liberation as much as for survival. The syncretism of Vodun and Catholicism ensured that African traditions would not only survive, but would adapt and transform into something even stronger. In the Americas, the Loa became a central part of the Afro-Caribbean religious practices that evolved over centuries. In Haiti, Vodin remained a dominant spiritual force, with the Loa continuing to guide the people through political upheavals, revolutions, and the struggles of daily life. In Cuba and Brazil, similar practices emerged, blending Catholicism with African deities, creating vibrant religious systems such as Cuban Santeria and Brazilian Candomblé. These syncretic religions flourished because they were adaptable. They could evolve while retaining core elements of African spirituality. Vodin, as a fusion of Catholic saints and African deities, not only preserved cultural identity, but also allowed it to grow in strength, becoming a symbol of resistance, unity, and pride for generations of African-descended people. This transformation of Vodin was not merely a matter of survival. It was a reassertion of cultural autonomy and spiritual strength in the face of adversity. Through syncretism, Vodin not only preserved the African spiritual traditions, but also expanded them, enabling them to resonate with new generations and to remain relevant in the ever-changing context of the Americas. It was a form of spiritual resilience, proof that no matter how much the enslaved Africans were torn from their homeland, they could still carry with them the divine power of their ancestors. Today, Vodin continues to be a central part of the cultural identity for many in the African diaspora, especially in Haiti, Cuba, Brazil, and other parts of the Caribbean and Latin America. The syncretism that began as a means of survival during the brutal years of slavery has become a living testament to the enduring power of African spirituality. In this way, the merging of Vodin with Christianity didn't just allow African deities to survive. It allowed them to flourish, to adapt, and to thrive in new worlds. Vodin's ability to survive slavery, to merge with Catholicism, and still retain its core spiritual essence, is a powerful reminder of the resilience and resistance of African cultures in the face of systemic oppression. The gods did not die. They hid, they adapted, and they rose again. Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango are among the most revered deities in African diasporic religions. These gods, each associated with powerful elements of nature, have roots that stretch deep into African spiritual traditions. Ogun, the god of war, iron, and labor, represents strength, resilience, and the capacity to overcome obstacles. Yemaya, the goddess of the ocean and motherhood, is seen as a protector and provider, embodying fertility, nurturing, and the life-giving power of the sea. Shango, the god of thunder and justice, is both a fierce warrior and a symbol of righteous authority. These gods held significant roles within the spiritual lives of the Yoruba people, serving not only as protectors but also as guiding forces of morality, justice, and societal order. Yet, when millions of Africans were forcibly taken to the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade, these gods did not disappear. They transformed and adapted, becoming even more powerful in new, unfamiliar lands. As enslaved Africans were brought to the Caribbean and Latin America, they were forced to navigate a world that sought to strip them of their identity and cultural heritage. Christianity was imposed upon them, and many African spiritual practices were outlawed or severely restricted. But rather than abandoning their beliefs, enslaved Africans found ways to preserve their connection to their deities, disguising them beneath the veil of Catholicism. Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango, like other African deities, adapted to these new environments, maintaining their core attributes while taking on new forms and meanings. In Cuba, for example, Ogun became not just a god of war and iron, but a warrior god of the oppressed, protecting the enslaved as they fought for freedom. Yemaya, once the goddess of the sea, became a protector of the people, guiding the enslaved through turbulent times and offering them solace in a world full of suffering. Shango, with his thunderous power, evolved into a figure of justice, fighting for the rights of the downtrodden and demanding accountability from those who would oppress others. Though these gods were now hidden within the symbols and figures of Catholicism, their essence remained unchanged. This transformation was not merely about survival, it was about cultural evolution. As African spiritual practices merged with Christianity, they did so in a way that preserved their core elements, while also adapting to the specific circumstances of the diaspora. In Cuba, the syncretism of African beliefs with Catholicism gave rise to Santeria, a religion that blended the worship of African deities known as Orishas with Catholic saints. Ogun became syncretized with Saint George, Yemaya with the Virgin of Regla, and Shango with Saint Barbara. Similarly, in Brazil, the fusion of African traditions with Catholicism led to the development of Candomblé, a religion that also honored the Orishas, with Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango playing central roles. In Haiti, Vodou evolved in a similar way, with these deities continuing to serve as powerful symbols of resistance and protection. While the forms these deities took in the Americas were influenced by the dominant religion, their essence remained rooted in African traditions, shaping the spiritual practices of millions. The survival of Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango in the Americas is a testament to the enduring strength of African spiritual practices, even in the face of overwhelming oppression. These deities not only provided spiritual guidance, but also became symbols of resistance, offering enslaved Africans a way to connect to their heritage and their cultural identity. Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango served as sources of empowerment, providing their worshippers with strength, protection, and justice in times of unimaginable suffering. They helped shape the religious and cultural landscapes of the Americas, creating vibrant, resilient communities that held onto their African roots while forging new paths in the New World. In modern times, the reverence for these deities has continued to thrive, as they remain central to the identities of African diasporic communities across the globe. In Cuba, Brazil, and Haiti, Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango continue to be honored in religious ceremonies, festivals, and rituals. These deities have become symbols of cultural pride, empowering individuals to connect with their heritage and reclaim their history. Ogun is still worshipped as a god of strength and labor, Yemaya as a mother figure and protector, and Shango as a symbol of justice and moral authority. These deities are more than just religious figures. They represent the resilience and power of the African diaspora, a reminder of the survival and perseverance of African cultures in the face of centuries of colonization, enslavement, and oppression. Moreover, the influence of these gods extends beyond the religious sphere. In contemporary African diasporic communities, the reverence for Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango is a way of asserting cultural identity and pride. These deities are seen as symbols of resistance, resilience, and empowerment, reminding individuals of the strength of their ancestors and the importance of preserving their cultural heritage. Whether in music, art, or daily life, the influence of Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango is felt in the continued celebration of African traditions and the ongoing fight for justice and equality. The survival of Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango is not just a story of religious transformation. It is a story of cultural endurance. These gods did not just survive the horrors of slavery. They adapted and thrived, continuing to shape the lives of millions of people across the Americas. Their survival is a testament to the strength of African spiritual traditions and the unbreakable bond between the African diaspora and their ancestral roots. The gods have not only survived, they have evolved, continuing to offer guidance, protection, and strength to future generations. The survival of African deities like Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango, in the face of the brutal forces of slavery and colonialism, is nothing short of miraculous. These gods, once deeply tied to the daily lives and beliefs of the Yoruba people, did not simply vanish as they were carried across the Atlantic. Instead, they endured, transformed, and found new forms of expression in the lands of the Caribbean and Latin America. Their adaptation within syncretic religious systems, such as Santeria, Candomblé, and Vodou, not only allowed them to persist, but also became a form of spiritual resistance against the forces that sought to erase their identities. As these deities merged with Catholic saints, they took on new meanings but retained their core attributes. Ogun remained the god of strength and war, Yemaya the protector of life and motherhood, and Shango the embodiment of justice and righteous fury. In the Americas, they became symbols not only of spiritual guidance, but of resistance and empowerment, offering enslaved Africans the strength to persevere through unimaginable hardships. Through worship, these gods provided hope and solace, a spiritual anchor in a world designed to strip away dignity and identity. This blending of African and Christian traditions was more than just a survival tactic. It was a declaration that no matter how much the enslaved were forced to conform, their spirituality could never be fully suppressed. In every prayer, in every ritual, these deities were remembered, their power growing stronger, symbolizing the unbreakable connection between African heritage and the spirit of resistance. The syncretism that took place in the Americas did not just preserve these gods, it allowed them to thrive, adapting to a new reality while remaining true to their roots. In the modern day, the legacy of Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango continues to resonate in the hearts and minds of people around the world. In places like Cuba, Brazil, and Haiti, their worship is not merely a religious practice. It is a statement of cultural pride and resilience. These deities, once hidden in plain sight, are now openly celebrated as symbols of the enduring strength of the African diaspora. Their continued reverence is a testament to the vitality of African spiritual traditions and their ability to evolve while maintaining their profound cultural significance. Ogun, Yemaya, and Shango remain more than mere figures from the past. They are alive in the songs, the dances, and the prayers of people who continue to honor them. These gods are not just relics of a bygone era. They are active forces in the lives of those who seek empowerment, justice, and spiritual connection. They are the living embodiment of survival, adaptation, and the will to resist. And they continue to offer guidance, strength, and protection to all who call upon them. As we reflect on the enduring presence of these deities, we are reminded of the power of cultural resilience. The gods of Africa did not simply survive, they transformed, they evolved, and in doing so, they became symbols of hope and resistance that transcend time and place. Their story is not just a historical one, but a living legacy, one that speaks to the enduring power of faith, identity, and the unbreakable spirit of the African people. So, as we close this chapter, ask yourself, what do these gods represent for you? What does their survival, their transformation, and their triumph mean for the world we live in today? The gods of Africa are still with us, alive in spirit, in song, in resistance. Their voices echo, reminding us that no force can ever truly break what has been built by the strength of generations before us.